Okay, welcome everybody to the second installment in the series, Dirty Rotten Scoundrels, Biblical Villains. And tonight we're doing Korach. Some animals are more equal than others. Okay? It's a little challenging getting into the villainy, if you will, of Korach, because I'm not presuming knowledge of the biblical narrative of the whole episode of Korach, and I feel it's only fair to review that, and hopefully whatever time allows, we'll try to go a little bit subtextual. I'm going to be weaving in detail of the narrative from the Gemara and from the Medrash and from the various commentaries as we go along. For those of you who want to, I'm not going to be reading that much text tonight, but if you want to see what we're going to be covering, it basically goes, let's see, let me get the right page number here. Excuse me. Korach. From the very beginning of Parshas Korach, which is on page 741, there's actually a little bit of a segue to the end of Parshas Shlach, which also, I guess, you get enough of that on page 741. And it goes pretty deep into Korach. I'd say till about 749. Obviously, we're not going to read the whole thing or analyze the whole thing, but I hope to give it a little bit of a synopsis, and like I said, with whatever time we have to get a little bit more subtextual. Before I start, as always, I want to thank TorahAnytime.com for videotaping and recording and publishing these shiurim on the website. A very worthy organization. Anyone who can do anything to support them, please do. And please avail yourself of the services. Whether you like this particular class or not, there are literally thousands of lectures available from hundreds of different speakers on the TorahAnytime.com website. If you've never checked it out, please do. Okay. The title of tonight's class, Some Animals Are More Equal Than Others. I was referencing the famous last scene of that parody written by George Orwell called Animal Farm, where it's pretty obvious the parallels to geopolitics. He's lampooning the totalitarian state, in particular communism. There's a Stalin, there's a Lenin character in the story, there's a Trotsky character, there's a Stalin character. And the denouement of the book is, at the very end, you have this wild party by the pigs, who were supposed to represent, I suppose, the communist commissars. They've taken over the farm, and lo and behold, their slogan has been already for a long time, some animals are more equal than others. They'd raised this egalitarian revolution to defy the government of the farmers, thrown out the farmers, aka the Tsar, right? And lo and behold, by the end of the book, they are acting in Tsar-like manner. They are standing on 2 feet. They have adopted the ugly features of the humans that they were supposed to have deposed. So the reason that I chose that for the title of tonight's class is because the parallel is pretty striking in as much as Korach talks an egalitarian game, but he's really as much of an aristocrat and a royalist as the power structure that he's trying to depose, as we'll see shortly. What fomented the Korach revolution? According to our sages, it was a personal gripe about Korach getting passed over for promotion. Vayikach Korach ben Yitzhar ben Kahas ben Levi v'datzam v'aviram b'nei Aliyah v'om ben Pelas b'nei Reuven. They took themselves aside, started an opposition party, and fomented this revolution. Korach was the son of Yitzhar, the grandson of Kahas and great-grandson of Levi. Okay? He is what we call, in the vernacular, a Groise Yachsen. He's a man with an impeccable pedigree. For those of you not familiar with the minutiae of the tribe of Levi, so let me tell you how he was related here. Kahas had 4 sons. Amram was the oldest, was the Bechar of Kahas. Yitzhar, Chevron, and Uziel. Okay? Amram's children are pretty famous. Aaron, Moshe, Miriam. Let me go in chronological order. Miriam, Aaron, and Moshe. Okay? The three redeemers from Egypt. Yitzhar had a son, Korach. Chevron, I'm not 100% familiar with who his son was, but it's really not pertinent to the story here. Uziel had a son, Elitzaphan. This Elitzaphan was named the tribal chieftain, or the Rosh Beis Av, the family chieftain of the Bnei Kahas. At this point, Korach couldn't take it anymore. He said, look, my father had three brothers, I have three uncles. The oldest uncle, okay, one of his sons became the king of the Jews, aka Moshe. The next one became the high priest. Okay? It stands to reason that the next one available for the next office that opens up should be yours truly. Okay? In chronological order, my father was the next oldest of the brothers, and here I get passed over for promotion. And which of my cousins gets the appointment? The son of the youngest of the four siblings of that generation of the family. Okay? This is what I say, just tell us what set him off. Okay? So the presumption is that had he gotten this appointment, this whole episode never would have occurred. All of a sudden, he's not so worried about the little guy. He's not so worried about the fact that there is a hierarchy and an aristocracy among the Jewish people. It's because the right aristocrats were not appointed that he foments his revolution. And what's the revolution? The ringing words. Let's go to verse 3. They demonstrated against Moshe and Aaron and declared to them, you've gone too far. All the people in the community are holy, and God is with them. Why are you setting yourself above God's congregation? So, like I said, Korach speaks with forked tongue. He speaks the language of equal opportunity, of egalitarianism, kol ha'eda kulam kadoshim. Rashi, quoting the Medrash, says what he meant to say was, each and every Jew, which is true, the fact is undeniable, each and every Jew heard at the revelation at Sinai the first two of the Ten Commandments, I am the Lord your God, thou shalt have no other God before me. There was no intermediary. They all heard it directly from God, and that infuses them with an intense holiness. And the underlying implication is we don't need a hierarchy. We don't need a superstructure of messengers between man and God. A Moshe Rabbeinu to bring God's message to the people, an Aaron, a Kohen, or a Kohen Gadol to bring the people's offerings to God. We don't need any of that. It's direct, and most important, it's egalitarian. It's equal opportunity. Everyone's in equal holiness here. To start creating a hierarchy and offices and all kinds of bureaucratic gradations, that's apparently what he was fighting against. That's overtly what he was fighting against. Just a second. Okay. A few more words about Korach before we move along in the text here. Our tradition says that whether or not he was the president of the Beis Av, of the family house of Kahas or not, he was Meinosei Ha'aron. When the Jews traveled in the wilderness, there was a tabernacle, there was a moving temple, and when they broke camp, when they went from place to place, they needed to carry the various vessels, the various furniture, the various implements of the tabernacle. The holiest and the most prestigious of these, obviously, was the Ark of the Covenant, the Aron Kodesh. And Korach was one of these rare Levites who had this honor, this appointment to be among those who carried on their shoulders the Ark of the Covenant. According to the Zohar, I'm not, as I always say here, any similarity between me and a scholar of Jewish mysticism is purely coincidental. I always see these things in secondary text. I saw this, I believe, in either one of Rav Tzadok's Svarim or the Nice Dasher from the Sakhachover. They bring from the Zohar that had he bided his time, had he not pushed the envelope, as it were, he was set for an even higher appointment than his cousin Elitzaphan got, to wit, just as there are rank and file Kohanim, and yet there is the office of the Kohen Gadol, the high priest, So too, there are rank and file Levium. Levium had a role in the temple service as well. Eventually, when there was a permanent temple in Jerusalem, the Levium were in charge of two major functions. They were the palace guard, if you will. They guarded the gates. They were opener and closer of the gates of the Temple Mount and the temple compound itself. And they were the leaders of the Levi Tabernacle Choir, for want of a better description. They were choir masters. They had a symphony orchestra, and so on. And the orchestra, actually, Yisraelim, non-Levium, could participate as well. But in the choir, you had to be a Levi to participate, and that was their role. So we had our rank and file Levium. The Zohar says that Korach was slated to be the Levi Gadol. Exactly how that would have manifested itself in terms of a unique function or role, I'm not sure. But just as there is a concept of a Kohen Gadol, Korach was slated to be a Levi Gadol. And the secondary source I saw it in is the spoil says, and you see what an exalted soul he must have been, in as much as no one could fill his shoes. Once Korach was eliminated, the office was eliminated. Maybe you needed Aaron to be a trailblazer, to be the first Kohen Gadol, but there were many Kohen Gadol, there were many high priests. It became an office that was filled. Nobody could blaze that spiritual trail to be a Levi Gadol except for Korach, but like I said, he blew it by pushing the envelope. So, he must have been an exalted soul of some kind. He was also fabulously wealthy. It's a Yiddish sprichwort, Reich wie Korach. Nowadays we say, the guy's a Rothschild, or maybe before the fall, maybe we said, guy's a Bernie Madoff. Right? But in the old days, in the old country, they used to say Korach Reich. The guy's, rich as Korach. And again, I'm not going to go through the Chazals. The Agadah is not clear if they're speaking in exaggerated terms or not. But it says he needed a troop of 300 white donkeys to carry his wealth wherever they traveled in the desert. He was the richest Jew of the generation that left Egypt. According to our sages, he discovered one of 3 buried treasures buried by none other than Yosef when he was the viceroy of Egypt. Before leaving Egypt, besides whatever booty everyone kind of pillaged from Egypt before they left, he had this treasure of Yosef at Tzaddik. So he had it all. He had it all going for him. He was rich. He was aristocratic. Like I said, he had probably the second best pedigree after Moshe and Aaron among the whole Jewish people. He had wealth. He apparently had popularity. He must have been a charismatic figure to draw these people around him. And even though it started off, the irritation that started rubbing him the wrong way was the idea that can you pass this along maybe to those who came later? This is back. Was the appointment of Eli Tzafan ultimately what he and his Eidah, the congregation, the army that he built around him were challenging was no more, no less than the Kahuna Gedolah, as we'll see in a few minutes. Okay. As far as his forked tongueness, okay, there's a segue over here right at the beginning of the parsha. The parsha that precedes Korach is the parsha of Tzitzis, of the 4-corner garment that we put fringes on. A mitzvah that was lost to the Jewish people for probably close to a millennium and has recently, in some circles, come back into the vogue, is the mitzvah of tchelis, of putting a blue strand on your tzitzis. Whether we're talking about talis katan, the smaller talis that people wear all day long, or a talis gadol, it's usually worn as a prayer shawl. There's a mitzvah to have a strand of, traditionally we believe it's some kind of shade of blue, sky blue. It has to be dyed in a certain way, and the dye's got to come from a certain sea animal. Not clear exactly what the animal is and how to prepare it. One of the things that we lost in our long and bitter exile. But there is such a mitzvah in the Torah. Those of you who read Kriya Shema twice a day know it's the last parsha of Shema. Hakanaf psil techeles. On the corner, one strand of blue. So, our sages say that Korach and his 250 henchmen, the Eidah of Korach, approached Moshe Rabbeinu wearing talisa shekulam tchelos. There were 4 cornered garments, not with one strand of this blue dyed wool. The entire garment was made out of this blue wool. Parenthetically, one of the special garments of the Kohen Gadol was something called a me'il, which was like an oversized talis-katan, an oversized serape that was totally of this blue wool of tchelos and had no tzitzis on it. Just an interesting footnote. But at any rate, they came to him wearing talis with no tzitzis on it. And Korach posed the following questions to Moshe Rabbeinu. They were rhetorical questions. He wasn't waiting or looking for an answer. He said, let me ask you something, Moshe Rabbeinu. A talus shekulo tchelos, if my talus, my 4-corner garment, is entirely woven of this blue dyed wool, does it need the single strand to hang from a corner? Oh, and while we're at it, Bayis Malei Svarim, if I have a house that's full of Torah scrolls, do I need a little mezuzah on my doorpost outside? And the metaphor was achingly obvious. What he was trying to say is, if there is a kedusha, if there is a sanctity that's pan-national, that's common to everyone, why do you need a salience? Why do you need something outside the body of the thing itself? If there's something holy, if there's something sanctified about this blue dyed wool, and the entire garment has this quality to it, I don't need anything sticking out. If you've got a house that's a warehouse for Sifrei Torah, think not of a one Aron Kodesh with 2 Torah scrolls in it. This whole room is filled top to bottom with Sifrei Torah. So one little excerpt from the Sefer Torah, two little excerpts, 2 parshias and a mezuzah. That's essentially what a mezuzah is. It's an excerpt, it's a tiny Torah scroll. But it's outside the house. Does anything need to be salient, to rise sideways, above, horizontally, whatever, to be not part and parcel of the house itself? He was sticking it to Moshe Rabbeinu. And then he launched into his line, Kol Eidem Kulam Kadashim B'V'Sochem Hashem. We're all holy. God is among us all. What's this? Madua Tisnasu Al Kal Hashem, Alam Hashem, Al Kal Hashem. Why are you making yourself salient? Why are you raising yourself and your brother and your cousins up above the rest of us? We've got that quality that you're claiming is apparently something unique to you. It's not unique to you. We're the Tal Shekul Tchelos. Yes?
Didn't God give Moses the instructions about what he...
Oh, so let me conclude. He didn't wait for an answer. He said, you're making it all up. He said, it's impossible that God commanded you in these mitzvahs. God didn't command you in the mitzvahs of mezuzah. God didn't command you in the mitzvah of tchelos. And God most certainly, I see a conflict of interest here, God most certainly did not command you in the appointment of yourself to king, your brother to high priesthood, and apparently your pet cousin to be the head of our house, of our tribal house. Okay? Impossible. This is counterintuitive. It's impossible that a God that would have spoken directly to all the people as one and infused all of us with the same level of holiness would have promulgated these mitzvahs. So the machlokas, the argument between Korach and Moshe Rabbeinu mushroomed. It went from a little personal petty grudge over having been passed over for promotion, as it were, to this kind of egalitarian revolution, to the point where he's challenging Moshe Rabbeinu's integrity as a transmitter, as a faithful transmitter of God's message. You're a false prophet, you're not teaching the Torah properly, we can't trust you on anything. Okay, so it's a lot more serious than it at first appears when you just read the text itself. There's a secondary issue of humiliation over here that the Talmud recounts. Sanhedrin, page 110. Besides the humiliation that Korach felt for being passed over promotion, even when he was promoted, that is to say, along with all of his fellow tribesmen, the Bnei Levi, a few parshias earlier in the Torah, it's recounted that the process by which the Leviim were sanctified, were elevated to their station, involved a full body shave, that'd be entirely shaved, and tnufa. Moshe Rabbeinu and Aaron had to give them a little bit of a lift. Okay? The Ramban says, Nachmani says, obviously we're talking about an open miracle over here. For two men to be able to lift 24,000 men, even if the two men, were built like Schwarzenegger and the 24,000 men were 70-pound weaklings, it doesn't matter. It's an open miracle.
I'm sorry.
But it says that, yeah, what?
I'm sorry, I didn't catch what Moshe Rabbeinu and Aaron did.
The Levium filed by,
right.
And each one had a tnufa. A tnufa, approximately what we do with a lulav when we shake a lulav. They were lifted a little bit and shaken around a little bit. Okay. So, the significance is that Korach went around, this aristocrat, this wealthy man, this apparently very charismatic individual, went around throughout the encampment of Israel, and nobody recognized him. His hair was gone, his beard was gone, right? He didn't look like himself. And his wife told him, he said, can't you see how those two brothers are making light of you? They're making a they're making a laughing stock out of you and your fellow Levium. She said it very interestingly. She said, they were jealous of your hair. I guess your hair made you very handsome, your hair made you very distinctive, and they shaved off all your hair. To which Korach said, what are you talking about? They're Levites too. They had to undergo the same process. They also got a full body shave, including their beard and their head. So how can you say that he was trying, or they were trying to humiliate us? To which the answer is, Tamus Nafshi and Plishtim, famous words, Samson's famous last words. Samson, the mighty man. Anyone know how he died? He was the first suicide bomber. Okay, he stood between two pillars in a Philistine temple, and he prayed to God, give me my superhuman strength back one more time. And he pushed the pillars and he brought the roof down. And he said, Tamus Nafshi and Plishtim. In other words, basically what that means is, I'm ready to die myself, to bring down the enemy. So he said that was the psychology that was motivating Moshe. Yeah, it's true. He humiliated himself a little bit, but look at what a good laugh that he had, that he was able to humiliate 24,000 other people in the process. That was her psychoanalysis of Moshe Rabbeinu. You have to hear, as you read this narrative, if that doesn't sound preposterous enough, in general, the preposterousness of the accusations that were leveled against Moshe Rabbeinu. Again, at the end of verse 3, I'm still on page 741. Why are you setting yourselves above God's congregation? In other words, he's accusing Moshe Rabbeinu of hubris. You're an egomaniac, a megalomaniac, an egomaniac. You think you're better than the rest of us. You're lifting yourself, you're a salience, you're that strand, that unique strand that sticks out of the talus. That's of a different color, a different hue than everybody else. Okay? The next verse says, Vayishma Moshe vayipol al panav. Why did he throw himself on the ground? What's so terrifying? Okay, he was accused of something. Defend yourself. He falls on the ground. We get back to Sanhedrin Kuf Yud.
Is that a way of humbling yourself before God, to say that he feels bad that somebody is even thinking to accuse him of these things?
That may be. I'm not saying that's an unacceptable approach, but this is the way the sages of the Talmud understood it. There's a recount of the whole argument, the whole rebellion, I should say, of Korach v'Hadassah in the Psalms. And there's a verse that says, Vayikanu l'Moshe b'machna. They were jealous of Moshe in the camp. Now that's a strange statement, because overtly they were jealous of Aaron, and covertly they were jealous of Elizaphan. There's nothing direct in the attack and the rebellion of Korach that speaks about a jealousy of Moshe Rabbeinu per se. So the Sage of the Talmud say that this is an allusion to the halachic institution of kinui and stira. Kinui and stira is something, when a husband suspects his wife of adultery, he warns the wife, I don't want you to go into seclusion with Mr. X. I think Mr. X and you are having an affair. I don't want you to go into seclusion with Mr. X. It says that Moshe Rabbeinu had pitched his tent outside the Machne. He had a separate tent where people would come. He was basically the Supreme Court justice. If there was a court system that had been instituted by the righteous convert Jethro, Yisro, and the most difficult questions went to Moshe Rabbeinu, and both men and women visited Moshe Rabbeinu's tent. So everyone thought when their wives were going to visit Moshe Rabbeinu, there was some kind of hanky-panky going on. And this was the ultimate humiliation for him. This is what brought him low. That's what it says in the Gemara. I wouldn't have made the connection. That's how the Gemara connects the two verses, one in the Psalms and one here. What's striking to me about this is the incredible baselessness of the accusation. Look who we're talking about over here. Who are you accusing of hubris? Who are you accusing of egomania? A man who God testified about, Vayish Moshe Anam Me'od Mikol Adam Asher Baretz. He was the soul of humility. Not only that, but you're getting into his intimate life over here. And Moshe Rabbeinu, at this point, after Matan Torah, was celibate. He wasn't even living with his own wife at the time. And to me, this is an echo of the accusation that his own sister made against him. A few parshas before, at the end of Parshas Bahalosecha, there's a episode where Miriam and Aaron, the two siblings of Moshe Rabbeinu, are telling him exactly the same thing. You've got either some kind of sexual maladjustment, or it's your hubris that separated you from your wife. We're prophets too, and we carry on a normal family life. What made you so special? To me, this is an echo of the same type of accusations. The Chiddushei HaRim says that, I think this is what psychologists call projection. Okay, when you've got a problem, you're always accusing other people of having the same problem. He was a man full of hubris. He was a man who was chalishing, if you will, for his next big promotion, for his next big appointment. And that's what he's accusing Moshe Rabbeinu, who was the very soul of humility of. Okay. You can see from the way the narrative develops that it wasn't such an egalitarian revolution, because like I said, his allies were, as it says in the first pasuk in the parsha, Dasan, Aviram, Om Ben Pelas, Reubenites, and in pasuk Bez, let's go back to page 741 for a second. Verse 2, they had a confrontation with Moshe, along with 250 Israelites who were men of rank in the community, representatives at the assembly and famous. Okay? There are 250 people who were themselves not exactly the lumpen proletariat, also aristocrats. Like I said before, these were the 250 people who were wearing the talis, talisos that were completely tchelis. Some of them were Levium, most of them, our sages tell us, were Levium, were Korach's neighbors, but there were representatives of every tribe. And why this was considered a crisis for the entire nation. It was a national crisis, this Korach rebellion. But at any rate, lest we think that it's all about Kol Eidakul Kedoshim, let's nullify the aristocracy, let's make it an even playing ground for everyone. You see the way the story develops, there's the test of the Machtes. Take a look on page 743. Verse 6. This is what you must do. Let Korach and his entire party take fire pans. Okay? It's King James sounding word, Baruch Hashem. The reason why I always put living Torahs on the table is because Rabbi Kaplan does a great job of usually avoiding this kind of rhetoric. What's a fire pan? Okay, basically a fire pan was an open-ended shovel that with a short handle, that they would rake a few coals off of the outside altar, the Mizbeach, that was in the courtyard of the temple. And it was used in not the regular incense service, there was an incense altar inside the sanctum itself, not in the courtyard. You used the fire pan once a year on Yom Kippur. And the one who used it was the high priest. And the place that he used it was the Holy of Holies, the inner sanctum. Right? So right away, the fact that Moshe Rabbeinu is offering them the possibility of doing the incense service that involves a fire pan is basically saying, you want to be a Kohen Gadol? Let's see if you got what it takes. Okay? So far from being, like I said, an egalitarian revolution, this is all about, you have at least 253 men, 254 men, I should say, Korach and the 3 Reubenites that I mentioned, and they're all vying for the Kahuna Gedolah. Actually, the Reubenites, it's not so clear, but certainly Korach and the 250 men. Moses, verse 8. Moshe tried to reason with Korach. Listen to what I have to say, you sons of Levi. Isn't it enough that God of Israel separated you from the community of Israel? He has brought you close to Him, allowing you to serve in God's tabernacle and to minister at the community's leaders. Although He gave this privilege to you and all your fellow Levites, you are now also demanding priesthood? It is actually against God that you and your party are demonstrating. After all, who is there that you should have grievances against Him? Okay, so he tries to talk reason to Korach, and he says very clearly that this is about uvikashtem gam kahuna. It's not enough for you to be Levites. Okay, it's not that you want to lower yourself to the rank and file Israelites or raise up the rank and file Israelites to your level. You already got a promotion. The promotion wasn't good enough for you. You want to be Kohanim, and it's clear from the test that was chosen that you want to be more than rank and file Kohanim. You want to be the Kohen Gadol. You want to do this most exalted of all services, the incense offering on the fire pans. I forget which sefer that I saw it in, but one of the underlying, the implied critiques of Moshe Rabbeinu on the Korach revolution is this quote-unquote egalitarian revolution. When you guys were elevated to be Levites, you didn't complain then. You say, hey, what's going on over here? Why have a Levite class? Why are we any better than the other 11 tribes? Then it didn't bother you. You got passed over for a particular promotion. Now all of a sudden you're complaining. Again, you're cloaking it in this rhetoric of that you're in it for the little guy. You're in it for the common man. The next step in the narrative is Vayishlach Moshe likra l'dasan u'laviram b'nei Eliyav v'yomer lo nala. He wanted a diplomatic meeting with Dasan and Aviram. If you remember from the first verse in the Parsha, they were two of his 3 allies from among the Reubenites. On Ben Pelas isn't mentioned anymore. It's not mentioned here. He's not mentioned by the punishment for the rebellion. Why and when he dropped out, hopefully if time allows, we'll get to a little bit later. But now he's talking to Dasan and Aviram. If I'm not mistaken, I certainly don't have the keys to know this by heart, but I did try checking on the Mechon Mamre database before the class, and to the best of my knowledge, this is the first place in the Torah where the names Dasan and Aviram appear explicitly in the text. However, we have a tradition that Dasan and Aviram were old nemesis of Moshe Rabbeinu. All right, well, Moshe Rabbeinu was still Prince of Egypt. In the famous episode where he says, Rasha lama saka re'acha, evil one, why do you strike your friend? The one doing the striking was Dasan. Okay, and according to one tradition, the one he was hitting was Aviram, his sidekick. But at any rate, he was the one doing the hitting, and with the same brazenness that he's about to display in this episode, he says, are you saying that you will kill me like you killed the Egyptian? He was threatening to rat him out to the Egyptian authorities, and that's when Moshe Rabbeinu absconded to Midian. Okay? That was Dasan Aviram. There is an anonymous opponent of Moshe Rabbeinu at Yam Suf, at the Sea of Reeds, before the miracle of the parting of the Sea of Reeds, that says, Nitna Rosh v'nashuva Mitzrayim. And he says, look, the Egyptians are running after us. We're going to drown or we're going to be slaughtered by the Egyptians. Let's appoint a new head and let's return to Egypt. According to our tradition, the ones floating that resolution were again Zt'zl and Aviram. So Zt'zl and Aviram have been the not so loyal opposition to Moshe Rabbeinu for a long time. And listen to how they respond here. Middle of verse 12, by the quotation mark. We won't come, was their response. Isn't it enough that you brought us out of Egypt, a land flowing with milk and honey, just to kill us in the desert? What right do you have to set yourself above us? You didn't bring us to a land flowing with milk and honey, or give us an inheritance of fields and vineyards. Do you think you can pull something over our eyes? We will definitely not come. There's a very fine idiomatic translation by Rabbi Kaplan. The Hebrew reads, Ha'enei ha'anashim ha'hem tinaker. Even if you gouge our eyes out, we won't come. Right? But he understands this to me, he's basing this on classic commentaries, that was roughly equivalent to what we say, pulling the wool over our eyes. Right? Either way, it's a way of saying what you think we're blind, you think we're naive, you think we can't see through you. Okay? There's all a manipulation on your part, you don't want peace, and you're not going to deliver on your promises. But, remember, just as they said before that all of the Jewish people heard Anochi Hashem Elokecha, the first two of the Aseret Adibros directly from God, the Jewish people also saw Moshe and Aaron performing supernatural miracles in Egypt. They saw Moshe part the Sea of Reeds. They saw him deliver on his promise for bread from heaven. Everything that's going on with this generation is totally and utterly miraculous. And these guys, we see through your fraud, you're a manipulator. Parenthetically, Zt'zl and Aviram also traditionally were the ones who left over from the man, who didn't believe the man. They were the total cynics. They didn't believe the man, even though it fell the first day, and Moshe Rabbeinu said, don't collect for 2 days, because there's something that's going to fall every day. They were the ones who left over, who collected a surplus of manna bread, for a second day. And it's also interesting when we're talking about the integrity of Moshe Rabbeinu's mission, very, very famous passage of Maimonides, who says, and you have to know parenthetically that in Maimonides' dogma, Maimonides articulated 13 articles of faith. Judaism is about both faith and works. There are mitzvahs for how we act, there are mitzvahs for how we speak, and there are mitzvahs for how we're supposed to think and believe. And one of the things that we're supposed to believe in, or I should say two of the things we're supposed to believe in, is first of all, the truth and the human capacity for prophecy. And number two, the supremacy of Moshe Rabbeinu's prophecy over that of all other prophets, both those who preceded him and those who came after him. Maybe some of you are familiar with this, from the Yigdal that we sing in Shul, or maybe some of you say, Maimonides' 13 Articles of Faith after the morning service. It's printed in all the Siddur. At any rate, when Maimonides is writing about the faith that the Jewish people have in Moshe Rabbeinu, they say they didn't believe in Moshe Rabbeinu because of the miracles alone. Because mi shemamin al pi ma'asim yesh b'li by Dovid. Somebody who believes in a prophet because of the miracles that the prophet has performed, that's not a full-fledged faith. There's always something, smoke and mirrors, optical illusion, sleight of hand. Maybe he's a sorcerer. Maybe this is supernatural, but maybe he's tapping into the dark side to do this. Right? I'll never forget, before I worked for the Jewish Heritage Center, I was a rabbi at a specialty high school for children from immigrants of the former Soviet Union. And I don't know what part of Chumash I was teaching the boys at the time. I think it was probably the Kriyas Yamsuf, the parting of the Red Sea. And one of the kids raises his hand and he says, Rabbi, you know what was Moshe? He was E.T., he was extraterrestrial. If I go into the Aboriginal bush with laser pointer, flashlight, and cigarette lighter, they are making from me a god. He came from Venus with superior technology. This is how we do all the miracles. Okay, it's a new one. I never heard that one before. But you get the idea. It could be anything. The Rambam says that part and parcel, it's unbelievable to me when you compare what Rashi says Korach meant when he said the whole congregation is holy. What does it mean they're holy? We heard directly from God. I'm the Lord your God, and thou shalt have no other God before me. Mamali says, you know why we believe in Moshe Rabbeinu? Because we were eavesdroppers when we heard the voice of God, when we all became prophets. We heard God telling Moshe Rabbeinu, I am the Lord your God, thou shalt have no other God before me. Go and tell the Jewish people. For that much, we heard directly the voice of God himself. So the same prophecy that he's endowing the Jewish people with, that talks about the truth of God and the truth of prophecy, and no bones about it, the elevated status of the chosen nation, of the people of Israel, right? That's the same voice of God that's ratifying that Moshe Rabbeinu is the genuine article. Okay? And there's no extraterrestrial question. There's no smoke and mirrors. At this point, Moshe Rabbeinu's reaction sounds a little bit aggrieved and sounds a little bit self-interested, but again, you have to understand what's at stake over here. We're talking about the integrity and the veracity of the entire Torah. This is mushroomed. It's no longer about who's going to be the chieftain of the Bnei Kahas. And Moshe Rabbeinu says, don't turn towards their offering, don't accept their offering of Ktares. He gets defensive. He said, I never took anything from them. I never took a donkey of theirs. Let me read you that verse. This is verse 15. Moshe became angry. He prayed to God, do not accept their offering. I did not take a single donkey from them. I did not do any of them any harm. Now again, there are different ways to interpret the Hebrew here. He said, I didn't take a single donkey. That means the word echad refers to the donkey. Okay? A lot of translators, a lot of commentaries said, I did not take a donkey from even one of them. And here, the Meshech Chochmah, Rabbi Simcha Vinsk, says a very interesting insight into Moshe Rabbeinu. He says, there are truly humble people, and there are people who like to posture humility. Okay? Famous Navardik, Kamaisa Navardik, was a Mussar yeshiva that worked very hard on self-abnegation. And the story goes that in the interbellum period in Eastern Europe, a lot of the Lithuanian yeshiva, there wasn't the kollel system of today. Guys learned till they were 35, 40, then they got married. These two gray-headed guys are sitting in the Beis HaMussar in Nevardhuk, and each one of them is shuckling over one of the great classical ethical texts, Path of the Just, the Gates of Repentance, whatever. And Reb Zt'zl is saying to himself, Oy Gewalt, ich bin azar gar nit. He says, wow, I'm such a nothing, I'm such a nobody. And Reb Beryl is sitting in his corner, and he says, oh, ich bin Ashim Blotte, ich bin a Vermel, ich bin mamish gar nit. He says, I'm mud, I'm a worm, I'm absolutely nothing. And some little kid, some 14-year-old kid from Riga, just came in from the hinterlands, and he sees these two old Talmidei Chachamim, and they're talking about how they're absolutely nothing. And gets a chachaton, the kasketl, his little Greek fisherman guy. He says, "Oh, Gewalt, was war gar nicht ich muss sein." He says, "Gewalt, just imagine what a nothing I should be." So Beryl looks at Zt'zl, and Zt'zl looks at Beryl, and Beryl gives Zt'zl a crack in the ribs, and he says, Zt'zl, gib a cook, da 5 Minuten, schon gar nicht. He says, he's here for 5 minutes and he's already a nothing? He says, you think it's so easy to be a nothing? So, Rabbi Simcha says, a lot of times you have these guys who are handsome and popular, intelligent, and humble too, right? Yeah, you have these guys who posture, or gals who posture at humility. And then you have the genuine, humble people. And this is one of the great litmus tests to know if you're dealing with a truly humble person or with a faker is as follows. The fakes, when they're dealing with the riffraff, with the lowest elements of society, they'll embrace them, they'll hug them, they'll talk to them like a peer. Nobody's going to make the mistake of thinking that they're really peers. All right? But when they have any kind of a conflict or a confrontation with somebody who may really be of their social or economic status, then they'll fight like tigers. All of a sudden, they're not so friendly, they're not so egalitarian, they're not so warm and welcoming. He says, Lo chamar echad mehem. Even the echad mehem, even the aristocrats from among them. Says Rabbi Simcha. Like it says, Kemat shachav achad ha'am. When Avimelech, the king of the Philistines, is speaking about himself and his near miss and adultery with Rivka, he says to Isaac, the Yitzchak Avinu, the one of the nation, almost slept with your wife. Now, he referred to himself as the one. Rabbi Simcha says it's the same echad over here. Lo chamar, not chamar echad, not I didn't take a single donkey. I didn't take a donkey from the echad mehem. I didn't try to lord it over the aristocracy, the people who might be competition for me. Even those people I always treated as peers. I never ran afoul of. I'm not trying to raise myself above the aristocrats. In fact, I'm not trying to raise myself above the rank and file. That doesn't prove anything. You can be a fake anav, you can be a fake humble person and do that as well. I didn't try to raise myself even among the achad ha'am. I never took one of their donkeys. I never aggrieved them in any way. So they devised this test of the machtos. Hashem commanded them to say, do this test of the fire pans. And then, probably the thing that this episode is most famous for, the psichas pi haaretz. The earth opens its mouth and swallows Dasan and Aviram and their entire households. Right? And Moshe Rabbeinu challenges. He says, if you think God did not send me, if it's milibi, if you think it's from my heart that I came up with all these mitzvos and all these appointments, what this rebellion is really about, then let these people die a natural death. But if Hashem did send me, then let a new creation be created. Okay, that doesn't mean literally a new creation should be created either. But that's how the text reads at any rate. Let there be a miraculous end to these people. And the way it says it is, as though it had a maw, as though it had a mouth, the earth opened up, and in sank Dasan and Aviram and their entire households. There was another manner that the rebellion, or the rebellious people were put down or were executed. Right? It says that a fire descended from heaven and burned up all of the fire pans and all the people sacrificing them, the 250 people. They were slain by fire. Then there was a plague. Like I said, this was a pan-national crisis over here. The 250 people were mostly Levites, but they had representatives from all the tribes, and there were many people who perhaps were not in the thick of the rebellion itself, but were supporters, were a silent majority or minority, I don't know exactly how much, that they were supporting the revolution as well. And it says a plague started to spread among the Jewish people. And then Aaron HaKohen comes to the rescue, interestingly enough, again with the same vehicle, with a machta, with a fire pan and incense. And it says, Vayamo ben HaMesim ben HaChaim v'teyatza Magefa. He stood between the living and the dead, and the Magefa, the plague, stopped in its tracks. Okay, that's a narrative in a nutshell. Took too long. Have to learn the art of brevity over here. Okay, let's talk about, the name of the series is Dirty Rotten Scoundrels, Villains in the Bible. Let's talk about the villainy. Let's talk about the Ra, the evil of Korach. Let's try to understand it a little bit better. And I think the maftayach, the key to this, is something that it says in Medrash Bereshis Rabbah. Just translate it for you. It says Bereshis Rabbah, chapter 4, paragraph 8. And the question that's posed is this: why doesn't it say on every day of Ma'aseh Bereshis, on every day of the 6 days of creation, it says, and God beheld what was created that day, and He said it's good. Right? God created the light, it's good. God created vegetation, it's good. Everything's good. The only day of creation upon which the words ki tov are not pronounced is the second day of creation. Okay? Second day of creation is the creation of the firmament. God said, let there be a firmament within the water, and it will separate between the waters and the waters. So the Medrash poses the question, why doesn't it say ki tov on the second day? The first answer is, Rabbi Yochanan answers, on the second day, hell was created. It's not explicit in the verse, but hell was created. Where is it alluded to? Later in the Torah, in Isaiah, chapter 30, verse 32. Ki oruch me'esmul tofte, gam hi lamelach huchan, heme kirchiv, medurosa eish, ve'etzim harbe. Nishmas Hashem kanachal gofris bar rabba. Okay, I don't have a living Torah in front of me. You'll have to accept a translation from humble me. He says, or this is the way the Medrash interprets it. On a day, the first day about which you could say yesterday, a place called Tofta was set up. Ki oruch me'esmol. The first day in the history of the world about which you could speak of yesterday was the second day of creation. On the first day of creation, there was no yesterday. On the second day of creation, there was a esmol, there was no shilsham. There was no 2 days ago, but there was a yesterday. So, ki oruch me'esmol tofte. Why is hell called tofte? It's etymologically related to the word pitui, seduction. Because it's through the seduction of the Yetzer Hara, the inclination to evil, that people end up there. Gamhila melech uchan, it's prepared even for kings. Hamik hirchiv, it was made broad, it was made deep. Medurasa eish ve'etzim harbe, its pyre is fire and much firewood. Nishmas Hashem, the breath, the exhalation of God. Kanachal gofris baraba, like a river of sulfur ignites it. Those are the words of Yeshaya. Not me, it's Chazal, it's a Medrash. It interprets this verse in Yeshaya to mean that the creation of hell took place on the second day. Reb Chanina says it was the day when machlokas was created, when arguments, when quarreling was created. What does that mean? There was one unified water on the first day. By creating a firmament, whatever these words mean, again, I'm not a mystic, I certainly don't make any pretensions to understanding the secrets of Ma'aseh Bereshis, but the text says that there was one undifferentiated mass of water, and now there's clearly Elyonim and Tachtonim. V'mavdil ben mayim l'moyim. This thing called the firmament, the Rekiah, will separate between the waters on high and the waters below. To which Reb Chanina comments, now that's a good thing. That separation is good. Right? For the cosmos to function, for the ecology to function properly, this had to happen. This is not a negative machlokas, but it's a machlokas, nonetheless. It's a separation. There's already a lack of unity. There's a sense of alienation. There's a sense of opposition and otherness here. And that's enough for God to say, this is not a good day. This is not a day where I'm going to pronounce my imprimatur of ki tov. This is good. It's not so good. Machlokas is never good. I don't think it's an accident. Speaking of machlokas, I really don't think that there's an argument going on between these two versions in the Medrash. Is the day a day that lacks goodness because of the creation of hell? Or is it a day that lacks goodness because of the creation of division, separation, opposition, quarreling? I think it might be two sides of the same coin. You have to understand that there are massive philosophical and theological problems with the whole concept of duality. It's things that much greater minds than I have grappled with for millennia. How does multiplicity flow out of unity? I mean, this was the great polytheistic versus monotheistic debate till a couple thousand years ago. There's got to be different deities. There's got to be a sun god and a moon god. There's got to be an ocean god and a desert god. How can one unified being have all of these mutually exclusive creations, if you want to call them creations, that they're responsible for, that they are the source of, that they somehow or another comprise and unite? How does the material derive from the spiritual? That's a more modern question. You know, I'm from Kansas. Show me. Missouri? What's the state? What's the show me side, Missouri? I'm from Missouri. Show me. You say there's a God? You say there's a soul? Show me. I don't see it. I don't see it. I don't touch it. I don't taste it. I don't smell it. Okay, get real. There's the real world. There's the material world. And who says there's anything else? Prove it. I can't. Maybe go to a Gateway seminar. Maybe go to an Arakim seminar. Maybe I can do it there. I know I can't. Okay? It's a very big question. How does I'm holding all questions out till the end because I have another class coming and I still have a lot of material to finish. How does material flow from the spiritual? It hides the spiritual. It obscures the spiritual. It belies the spiritual. And according to our sources, this split, this rakia, this firmament that creates upper waters and lower waters, right? We're not just talking about a geographical position. We don't just mean the oceans and the clouds. Okay? We're talking about waters that are in the spiritual spheres and water that are in the material world. That's what it means. Another famous Medrash says that the lower waters were crying. They said, we want to be before God. We want to be where the spiritual waters are. And the greatest of all questions is, how does evil come from good? We have a theology, we posit a good God, a kind God, a benevolent God, theodicy, suffering of the innocent, the question of evil, the existence of evil. All these things come from duality. There is good and there is evil. There is spiritual and there is material. These are all machlokasim. These are all splits, divisions, two sides of a debate, if you will. All right? So there are massive problems with that. That's not a simple thing. It's easy to gloss over. It's very easy for me to say, yeah, we read Kriya Shema and we talk about God being the God of night by day and of day by night, and so on and so forth. But the questions that stare you in the face are very often more than equal to the answers that anyone could possibly provide. And you see this from Moshe Rabbeinu's answer. Moshe Rabbeinu, Rashi says on the test of the fire pans, he said, you know, you're really coming, your quasi, however that word is pronounced, egalitarian argument, that kol ha'el kol kadoshim, it doesn't work that way. It says there's one God and there's one high priest. You want there to be 251 high priests? Okay, look, there are idolatrous cults out there, and a lot of ancient Near East cultures, right? Where there are a lot of different deities and a lot of different high priests for each deity, and they deal with multiplicity. We're about unity. We're one nation, chosen from among the nations of the world. We're one tribe, the Levites, that were elevated from among that nation. One family from among the Levites, Aaron and his sons, and among Aaron and his sons there's one high priest. And that speaks to the unity of God. And you want to break this down and basically descend into this world of multiplicity that really started on the second day, that hell of division, of alienation. A necessary evil, perhaps, but an evil, a day about which God could not pronounce it's good. It's a good day. Parenthetically, this is really the tachlis of one temple in Jerusalem. We know when we had the schism, the later schism, unlike the Korach rebellion, one that tragically worked, when you had the civil war among the Jewish people. And in the days of King Rehoboam, the son of Solomon, there was a civil war, and the Jewish people split into a southern kingdom and a northern kingdom. The first enactment of Yeroboam, or Jeroboam, the first king of Israel, was to set up two temples in the north and south, which featured golden calves in his kingdom, so that nobody should make the pilgrimage, the 3-time-a-year pilgrimage to Jerusalem. He understands that if you keep one capital of the Jewish people, that's going to solidify the claim to one kingdom. When you have a lot of different temples, so you can have a lot of different fiefdoms, you can have a lot of different kingdoms. That was his real politic, the mixture of of politics and religion strategy. Okay, I'm splitting away. I made my northern kingdom. I'm gonna have temples of my own. I'm gonna forbid my people to travel to the temple in Jerusalem. When the mitzvah of building a Beis HaBechira, a chosen temple in Jerusalem, is given to the Jewish people, it's said in terms of let them not worship anymore. We know that the Jews coming out of Egypt were also pagans, they were also idol worshippers, and it seems that one major subset of this pantheon was these kind of demons called Seirim. He said the idea of being able to just sacrifice wherever you want lends itself to Seirim worship. They'll have one tabernacle in the desert, and eventually when they come to Israel, one chosen house of God, and we're forbidding the act of sacrificing anywhere outside the temple. That's going to be a major deterrent to idolatry, to pagan worship. You won't have them sacrificing to all of these Seirim. Another thing about the hell of Machlekes, besides the obvious that they were swallowed by the earth and they were said to be Yored Chaim She'olah. They went to She'ol, a nickname, a synonym for hell in Jewish thought. Hell is a place of fire, whatever that means. Okay, I don't know. I doubt it means anything literal, but nevertheless, that's the metaphor that's used to describe hell. Those of them who weren't swallowed by the earth, a fire descended and consumed them. Those of them who perished in a plague, there was a fire, a feverish plague, a pandemic that was killing them, with a high fever, also sweating, burning, a sensation, a fire-like sensation. It's all about fire. And our sages say, see how terrible Machlekes is, see how hellish Machlekes is. Let me get you the exact verse that they're going on here. Take a look on page 745, verse 26. He announced to the community, get away from the tents of these evil men. Do not touch anything that is theirs, lest you be swept away because of all their sins. The people withdrew from around the pavilion of Korach, Dasan and Aviram went out and stood defiantly at the entrance of their tents, along with their wives, sons, and infants. Moshe announced, this shall demonstrate to you that God sent me to do all these deeds. I did not make anything up myself. If these men die like other men, and so on and so forth. We know what happened. Okay? So the Medrash says, see how terrible Machlokes is. I mean, we don't think of Machlokes as having a quarrel, of getting into a fight with somebody, as being the most egregious of sins. Idolatry is terrible, Shabbos desecration, murder, right? These are the really terrible sins. Having a fight, what's so terrible about it? The Medrash says, see how terrible quarreling and kinna and jealousy and sin and baseless hatred, these things, see how terrible it is. A human court, when the Jewish people had a Sanhedrin that meted out corporal or capital punishment, doesn't punish anyone until the age of 12 for women and 13 for men. The heavenly court, we know that there are heavenly punishments, Misa B'dei Shemayim, Kares, other things, doesn't punish until people reach the age of 20. And so here, infants died. Infants died. They weren't the ones fomenting the revolution. Rav Chaim Shmulevitz says, based on a Ramban, based on Nachmanides, on the pasuk that says, "Pen yesh b'chem shoresh peirosh v'lanu." It's talking specifically, the Torah is talking over there about what's known as the Mesis Umediach, for want of a better word, the missionary for idolatry, for avodah zarah, for paganism. Such a person is called a shoresh peirosh v'lanu, a root that blossoms into wormwood, into weeds, into bitter herbs. Okay? And basically, says the Ramban, that's a biblical metaphor. He says, for certain midos there are certain psycho-spiritual traits that if left unchecked, same way like where you have a beautiful lawn, if you've got dandelions on the lawn and you don't pull your weeds, okay, eventually you're not going to have a lawn anymore. All you're going to have is a weed field. All right, to supplant that with a biological metaphor, okay, some cancers are benign, some growths are benign, and some are malignant. And some metastasize at a greater rate than others. And some have a lower survival rate than others. All right? And there are certain averos, there are certain sins, there are certain negative character traits that have this propensity to blossom, to metastasize in a society, in a family, and so on. And I'm grabbed by the clock. I can't give you this whole exposition from Chaim Shmuel, but suffice to say, he says that's what machlokas is. That's what sin is. Excuse me. That's what arguments and quarrels are. They start very often. It's a single cell, if you will, that reproduce the wrong way. It can start very locally, okay, but left unchecked, it can metastasize and it can really destroy a whole society. And that's what he used to explain this idea. Again, I don't have the chance to tell you 100% his whole exposition over there. That's how he explains his medrash, that notes the fact that a lot more serious sins don't affect underage children. Whereas this sin and this midah, this propensity for argument, for quarreling, fomenting revolutions, that's something that affects everybody. Gewalt. I could give a whole other class about this. Okay, I'm just going to pick and choose a few points over here. There's a famous Mishnah in Pirkei Avos that says, "Kol machlokas shi l'shem shamayim sofa l'skaim v'shnei l'shem shamayim and sofa l'skaim ezehu machlokas shi l'shem shamayim zu machlokas hil v'shamay v'shnei l'shem shamayim machlokas karach v'aladasei." A machlokas, a fight, an argument, a quarrel that is for the sake of heaven, for pure motives, endures, and one that isn't, that's for ulterior motives, does not. What's the paradigm? The arguments between Hillel and Shammai, those are the examples of the arguments that endure. What's an example, a textbook case of an argument that does not endure? Korach v'kol adasa. Korach and his entire congregation. So there's a lot to say, but I don't have the time to say it. I'm just going to share with you one famous question and answer. All the commentaries asked. There's something unbalanced in the cadence and the syntax of this Mishnah, of this Tana. If we were giving equal examples, which we should have said, what's the example of a bad kind of argument? Moshe and Korach. Same way Hillel and Shammai, those are the two opponents. It should have said, and the good kind of argument is the argument between Moshe, the bad kind of argument, the argument that doesn't endure, that one of the parts of the argument sinks into history's oblivion, that's Moshe and Korach. Doesn't say that. It says Korach v'chol adasa. Said one of the early Hasidic masters, Rabbi Melech Lezhensk, on this Mishnah. He says, how are we to know? It's very hard. Like I said, there were subconscious things at work over here. I don't know if Korach himself knew 100% what was motivating him. Maybe he wasn't a cynical manipulator. Maybe he really talked it into himself that he was a fighter for the egalitarian principle. Parenthetically, there's a whole school of Hasidic thought that are apologists for Korach, that say he was just ahead of his time. He really was an egalitarian. He was jumping the gun on the Messianic era. It's a whole different talk. We could spend a few weeks talking about that school of thought. But at any rate, how's a person to know? It's very hard for a person to look into the mirror and say, my motives are pure. How do you know they're pure? So he says, when you have parties, when you have special interest groups, but at least there's peace within this special interest group. Okay? At least, all the Democrats are on the same page. All the Republicans are on the same page. So then when the Republicans fight with the Democrats, that might be a machlokas l'shem, except the separation of church and state, of course. Who mentioned God here? Who's talking about for the sake of heaven? Right? He says the problem with Korach was not that he was fine with Moshe Rabbeinu, is that there was unbelievable infighting within the Korach camp itself. Korach wants the appointment for the head of the Bnei Kahas. The 250 men, they want Kuna Gedolah. they're fighting with each other because there's 250 candidates for one office. Even though Moshe Rabbeinu baited them, he said, well, you can't have 250 Kohanim Gedolim. Really, the way the challenge was set down was, the single person that God chooses, he'll be the Kohen Gadol, and everyone else will perish. Right? So you had 250 people fighting with each other, competing for the same office. Then you have Dasan and Aviram and Om Ben Pelas, Reubenites. What are they in this for? Okay, that was L'Shem Shemayim, that was L'Shem Machlekes. I mean, Dasan and Aviram had a long rap sheet of that whatever Moshe Rabbeinu says black, we'll say white. Whatever he says white, we'll say black. We're just here to oppose him. Parenthetically, if you want to know why Om Ben Pelas, who appears in the first verse, disappears from the whole scene, it's because the Gemara and the Chazal contrast Rabbits and Korach and Rabbits and Om. Korach's wife bought him a one-way ticket to hell, and Om Ben Pelas' wife saved him. Om Ben Pelas' wife said to him, what do you get out of this fight? He said, if Moshe Rabbeinu is the Rabbeinu, you're still the Talmud. You're still a rank and file guy. You're a Reubenite. You're certainly not going to be elevated to the office of a Kohen. All right? And if Korach is Korach Rabbeinu, you're still a Talmud. What do you get out of this? Okay? Whatever. It's a more involved story, but that's it in a nutshell. And the Chiddushei Arim says, it's an amazing thing, and I'll close with this. I told you how there's a verse in Tehillim that recounts the machlokas of Korach and his whole congregation. The verse in Tehillim says as follows. This is Tehillim 106, verse 16 through 18. Talks about the whole machlokas, and the culmination of those verses in Tehillim says, Tiftach eretz v'tivla dasan v'tachas adas aviram. The earth opened up and swallowed Dasan, and it covered up the congregation of Aviram. Dasan, Aviram, what happened to Korach? It's not Adas Aviram, it's Adas Korach. It's the congregation, it's the band, it's the rebels of Korach. So Rashi says, well look, the Bnei Korach were saved. And they're among the 7 people, according to our sages, who were co-authors of the book of Psalms. Lamnatseach L'Bnei Korach Mizmor. We say it right before we blow the shofar on Rosh Hashanah. There are many verses in the Psalms that talk about the Bnei Korach, the sons of Korach. Sons of Korach were supposed to be the Levite singers extraordinaire. So they were innocent, they didn't sin, and in their honor, their father's name was left out. Their father's name was not the name that should go down in infamy, at least in the book that they collaborated on until. Fascinating that Yaakov Avinu had to pray that his name should be mentioned together with Korach. Okay? But I think it's something more than that. Chiddushei Arim says that at the end, when it talks about, in the Chumash itself, when it talks about the earth opening up and swallowing, it talks about Dasan Aviram. It doesn't even mention Korach. He says, you want to know why that's so? Says the Chiddushei Arim, first guy Rabbi. He says, you can understand, you can begin to understand how a person's own hubris, how a person's own petty self-interest might compel them to get involved in something like this. But if you've got nothing to gain whatsoever, and you're getting involved in a machlokes, that's totally unforgivable. So when the Torah itself talks about the earth opening up and swallowing, it doesn't say swallowing Korach, it says swallowing Dasan v'Aviram. I'm submitting a possible suggestion that when the verse in Tehillim talks about this rebellion, again it attributes it to Dasan v'Aviram. So to close with a sports metaphor, you hockey fans out there know that half the attraction of hockey is not the good skating or the lightning, wrist action on the shooting of the puck. People go for the fights, right? The rule is, who gets sent to the penalty box? The third man into a fight. The first 2 guys are fighting. Okay, it happens. It's a rough sport. You lose yourself, you fight. But a third guy jumps in. What do you have to do with this fight? Dasan and Aviram, they were Lishma. They had no ulterior. They were fighters just for the sake of fighting. So I think we sometimes have to examine ourselves in our own lives. When are we fighting on principle? How much of it is principle? How much of it is self-interest? And how much of it is we just spoiling for a fight? We just enjoy fighting. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, I'm sorry I took too long.